You are listening to The Dish on Health IT, brought to you by Point of Care Partners, a leading health IT consultancy. Each episode will feature a rotating panel of senior consultants and guests who will talk about trends and innovations in health IT, while also highlighting how organizations can leverage these advances to solve their business problems. Shivani Patel, who is the Executive Vice President of Patient Access Operations and Technology Solutions at Asembia, joins POCP hosts Tony Schueth and Pooja Babbrah to chat about specialty automation, artificial intelligence, pharmacy interoperability, TEFCA, and more. This episode will provide stakeholders a perspective of how what happens in the pharmacy space impacts the rest of the healthcare ecosystem. You'll want to stick around at the end to hear from stakeholders in the industry sharing the reasons why they attend Asembia Summit each year. We hope you find this episode helpful. Remember, if you have topic ideas you'd like us to cover in future episodes, be sure to share them with us by emailing us at podcast@pocp.com or tweeting us at POCPHIT.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Dish on Health IT, where we invite health IT innovators and trend makers to discuss some of health IT's biggest news and most exciting milestones. Point of Care Partners is a health IT consultancy and trusted third party that works with stakeholders across the healthcare ecosystem, providing independent, objective insights and strategic recommendations based on our deep expertise. I'm Tony Schueth, CEO of Point of Care Partners. I'll be your host for this episode. I'm joined today by my co-host, Pooja Babbrah, PBM and Pharmacy Lead here at POCP, and one of the most well-regarded industry experts on pharmacy standards, specialty automation, and pharmacy interoperability. We're both thrilled to have Shivani Patel, Executive Vice President of Patient Access, Operations and Technology Solutions at Asembia. Welcome, Shivani.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
We are looking forward to a robust discussion today about specialty automation, transparency, pharmacy interoperability, TEFCA, and several other associated topics. But before we jump into our discussion, I'd like to have Pooja briefly introduce herself and tell us what she's looking forward to learning today from our discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. So Pooja Babbrah, as Tony mentioned, I am the Pharmacy and PBM Practice Lead, Point of Care Partners. I have had a real passion for specialty medications and trying to solve a lot of the problems we have with specialty medications and getting it in workflow for, 7, 8 years now. I am thrilled to have Shivani on the podcast because I think we met maybe 5, 6 years ago at an Asembia conference, and we've chatted so many times about what we can be doing in industry to kind of solve the issues. So thrilled to have Shivani here today to talk through and share kind of what they're doing at Asembia and some solutions as well. So
thank you so much, Pooja. It's been great. All these conversations that we have, I can see the progress that's being made in the industry, and I've always appreciated our conversations. Pooja's a wealth of knowledge, so I'm happy to be here.
He sure is. Shivani, why don't you tell us a little bit about Asembia and its mission, as well as a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'll start by an introduction of myself. As you said, Shivani Patel, EVP of Clinical Operations and Technology at Asembia. Been with the company close to 10 years. Started in the retail space as a pharmacist and then moved to specialty. In my specialty experience, I led compliance and persistency and patient adherence initiatives. And then I worked at a startup specialty pharmacy where I got a hyper-accelerated education on all the facets in specialty and all the things that connect all of the stakeholders, which was great and very rewarding. Came here at Asembia and have been blessed to be able to create solutions for the industry, technology solutions that are cutting edge, innovative, and can pioneer some of these solutions that all of the pharmacies, patients, prescribers, manufacturers, distributors are all experiencing and connect all of these different stakeholders.
It's really exciting and rewarding, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's start with the basics, though, for our audience. Can you explain what we mean by prescribing specialty medications? What kinds of treatments fall under this category, and how does it differ from standard prescriptions?
Sure. So in specialty pharmacy, you're going to see more it used to be more high costs. Now you're seeing all kinds of costs. You're seeing some barriers in implementation, and that could be, is it cold chain? How is it stored or supplied? And when it's refrigerated, does the retail setting have the storage capability? If not, that's where all of the mail order specialties were created, so they can have large refrigeration and distribution opportunities available. You also see other barriers such as, adherence, challenges getting implemented with prior authorizations. So not as easy as in the retail world when you could just call and get through a prior authorization with a simple phone call. There's, you need a lot of background on the patient and the patient's past therapies for the prior authorization to be successful. You might see other challenges as well in terms of not having the patient in front of you. So understanding what the patient's background is and the insurance. It's a completely new pharmacy to the patient. So there's always a communication challenge in specialty that you experience if the patient is new. And there's other barriers as well. So all of the stakeholders are not as well connected as you see in the retail space, right? Where you're going to your local pharmacist, they know you, you know them, and you know what to expect. I think the patient sometimes can be lost. The prescriber also doesn't know where to properly prescribe. Oftentimes the prescriber is sending the prescription to the patient's preferred pharmacy, but the preferred pharmacy doesn't have the inventory, doesn't have access to the payer. So there's a lot of logistical gaps there in the specialty space too that have to be navigated.
That's really helpful context. Pooja, I'll ask if you have more to add from your perch as a board member of NCPDP, as well as your participation in other standard development activities.
Yeah, I think Shivani was spot on, right? We used to kind of say cost is the, defining thing for specialty. To add to that, I think part of the problem is everyone defines specialty a little differently. So you can't go from health plan to PBM to PBM, and they have the same specialty list. So, that causes a lot of the delays and the confusion that Shivani mentioned, right, about, the prior authorization, things like that. I know from a standards development standpoint, a couple years ago, we worked on a joint implementation guide between NCPDP and HL7 to make sure that, so when a doctor goes to prescribe a specialty medication, they're not just sending the prescription, well, they send the prescription, but a lot of times in order for the specialty pharmacy to dispense it, they need that additional clinical information. And so, there's an implementation guide that's been balloted at both NCPDP and HL7 to allow pharmacies to actually pull the additional data they need from the EHR, the clinical data. It could be like a lab result or even something as simple as an allergy or a diagnosis code. And so, that goal out of that was really to help speed up the dispensing process for the specialty meds. Because, Shivani, you know this, right? It can take, up to 10, 14, sometimes even longer, just because you're chasing information down, I think, to dispense that medication.
Yeah, and transparency and sharing of data is so important in this space. And that's the barriers we need to solve for.
Yeah.
To be sure, it's complex. Let's explore some of the other challenges in this process, particularly from the perspective of healthcare providers and patients. Which can we address with technology? Which will rely on new processes? Is AI playing a role here? Shivani, let's start with you, and then Pooja, feel free to add your perspective.
I can say technology is definitely playing a role here at Asembia. I mean, technology is kind of the epicenter of our solutioning. We create technology that supports the industry. So that's one of our missions, is connecting all of our stakeholders and empowering them with tools to be able to manage their patients better. Just talking about the prescription journey in specialty, getting that prescription in, finding out all of the information you need about the patient currently and their history in order to do prior authorization, check their benefits, determine if the right way to fill the prescription is through their prescription benefit, their medical benefit, which channel does the pharmacy need to go, the patient need to go to for best coverage. And then there's, copay cards, bridge therapies, all of these other things that you have to be in the know of. So part of our technology is empowering the patient, the physician, and everybody else, and making them informed of what's happening. And if we all share the same status and information, that is so valuable, and that's kind of one of the gaps that we see a lot.
Pooja, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, we have this visual that we created a couple of years ago where it's really showing two sides of a book. And I think, to Shivani's point about whether the medications under the pharmacy benefit or the medical benefit is such an important piece of information that unfortunately, the technology is there, right, to offer that up to the physician. But if I'm a physician or prescriber, when I go to prescribe a medication, if the drug's covered under the medical benefit, they don't see that today. And so I think one of the biggest gaps is they're only seeing one side of the book, right? They're not seeing the side that if the medication's under the medical benefit. And, I know at Asembia, you guys have kind of this specialty retail program. And I know, a lot of these specialty drugs could be, dispensed at a retail pharmacy. But if a prescriber doesn't even know that that drug could be covered for the patient, right, that's a huge gap. So when I think about technology and the impact, I think we've got the pieces in place. It's just a matter of making sure that we are doing the same things that we're doing for the prescriber and for getting them information for the drugs under the pharmacy benefit as we are for the medical benefit. And I think that's a huge gap and a barrier today.
Right. And understanding that the players change on the pharmacy benefit versus the medical benefit. The pharmacy that's doing the dispense may change. There's also additional prescriptions that go along with it. It could be a device. It could be, if it's an infusion, all of the other paraphernalia that has to be supplied to the infusion pharmacy or site of care. So all of that has to be considered, and it does get quite complex. But I think the one thing we can solve for is that transparency piece. And I think that's an important and, mission for Pooja for sure. I can see that in all the work that she's doing. And I'm hoping to see a lot of good progress there. We've actually piloted some of those interoperability solutions. And one of the gaps that I'm hoping gets solved soon is what's a relevant amount of data, right? Either you're getting too much or you're not getting enough, and you're trying to treat a patient specifically prescribed for a drug, and you have too much data to go through or not enough of the right data, and then making assumptions about the data isn't the right practice either, right? So when you get, this is the patient's past therapy, was it actually filled? Or are you just telling me that the patient once had a prescription for it, but they never filled it? And so a lot of specialty pharmacies struggle because they only have half the picture, and you can't really make those assumptions without checking with the patient.
How about prior authorization? You mentioned prior authorization earlier, but when you think about specialty and how some therapies are covered under the pharmacy benefit, other are covered under the medical benefit, how does prior authorization work in the specialty realm?
Sure. And it varies by both, right? So pharmacy prior authorizations, it used to be simple. You could just call the insurance. They would give you an override. You would explain the situation over the phone, and you would be able to move forward in the pharmacy. So now, there's forms, electronic prior authorization, and the whole variation that needs to be submitted either by the pharmacy or by the insurance, depending on the plan and the state specifications. That in itself becomes complex because there is no one rule. There's some variability there as well. And then, that's what allows that patient to continue with the treatment. Some of them don't require an appeal. So then you have to do a secondary process. And so who's responsible for taking all of these steps? And does it help the patient to stay with the therapy that was prescribed? Or is somebody going to change their medication because another medication doesn't have the same barriers of prior authorization? So that can be a challenge. On the medical side, I would say it's not as instantaneous. I think we've done leaps and bounds on the pharmacy benefit side. The medical benefit side is still where we're challenged. It's not as real time as we see on the pharmacy side. And then there's multiple ways that the medical insurance has to be managed, right? Still by phone call or form or going specifically to an insurance portal and having the prescriber fill it out. And I think, the goal is to unburden the patient and the physician and make it simple for them, because it's just too complex when half of your medications go down one channel and others have, can be filled locally or through your retail pharmacy. That's too much noise, and we need to do better so that we can make it a better experience.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and I'll just add to that, so with the new prior authorization interoperability rule, right, CMS just put out, what was it, a month ago, 2 months ago, something like that. There is now going to be a requirement for the electronic prior authorization for, procedures and devices and things like that, but they left out medications, and kind of purposely, right? I mean, hats off to CMS, because they're now, I think, doing the research they need to do to better understand, Tony, and both you and Shivani already said, right, the complexity of specialty meds. Mm-hmm. And we've been in a couple of conversations with some with CMS and others where, we're really trying to lay out all those different pain points that you've mentioned. And, for CMS to really understand, if we are going to try to do this electronically, what does that mean? What's the data we need? And I think one of the biggest gaps is with the pharmacy side, like we have these eligibility files and, formulary and benefit files that are used today. We don't have that on the medical side. So it will be interesting. I think we're going to see some, either regulation or something hopefully around, around medications that will hopefully get the industry moving forward. But yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we've done an amazing job on for the drugs covered under the pharmacy side, and hopefully we can take some of those lessons learned for these specialty medications and prior auth.
Shivani,
share that information down the pathway with the prescription.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tony. Go ahead.
No, no problem. What do you think are the next steps? Are there policy changes? Is it industry, collaboration? Is it getting everybody on the same page? What are the next steps?
Yes, I think industry collaboration is important. I think a lot of transparency is still lacking. Being able to know as a patient what your coverage is going to be when you start a treatment. What is that cost going to look like at the 30-day mark, at the 90-day mark, so that you can be informed up front before those decisions are made and have a better discussion with your provider as they're determining the treatment for you. I think that's key. And then passing that information along. You'll see that in specialty, as a prescription changes hands from one stakeholder to another, a lot of the steps are repeated, so a patient goes into a doctor's office and fills out all of this information about their insurance and their history and their background. That information doesn't accompany the prescription and go to the pharmacy. Now the pharmacy is asking the same questions. Mm-hmm. If they're not the right pharmacy, a second pharmacy gets involved and they'll ask the same questions, so I think that's a big one. Electronic prescribing has certainly helped expedite a lot of the processes. So it's a great solution. It's missing all of the components that are necessary. And again, in these therapies that could be filled by pharmacy benefit or medical benefit, there are different components that you need to know. So it's important to create a master profile. And I know that that's another important initiative, right, is having that patient universal identifier and using that as an industry. So I think that's going to be very impactful.
But there is some controversy about that universal patient identifier, isn't there, Pooja?
Yes.
There is. Yeah, there's a lot of, there's one senator who always puts in this, you can't do anything with the universal patient identifier. I mean, it's interesting because so much of what we're talking about, right, could be solved, I would say, if we were allowed to do that. Totally understand, right, privacy concerns, whatever, but it's been interesting to see how industry is now starting to kind of work around that a little bit, I would say, and try to move things forward, which is good. I mean, we have to, right? We can't just keep waiting for it. And, I think that the identifier and even patient consent, right, of grabbing that consent kind of upfront and the patient understanding, I think is another area, right, with the specialty medications, because, Shivani, as you were saying, it can go to a couple different specialty pharmacies. You also have these hubs, right, that might be in the middle where they're trying to get consent from the patient to get more information. And, if that information is not being shared across all the stakeholders, that again just delays therapy for no reason, right? And then the patient's ending up in the hospital costing so much more anyway. So a lot around consent and UPI. And, there's definitely industry initiatives happening around this, which is good. I heard of one just recently in Chicago where, they're trying to test some things out. And just today I was on a phone call with a pharmacy vendor who was saying, that's kind of their biggest problem with trying to help pharmacists do even more clinical services is, have a way to capture those consents and being able to share it with others. So I think that's something over the, we're starting to see some real movement on as well, which is exciting.
Shivani, Pooja mentioned hubs. Mm-hmm. I've been in this business for a long time. I know there's a lot of confusion about what hubs are. Do you have a good way of sort of easily explaining that to people?
I mean, I can explain the Asembia model. I think not all hubs are created equal. I have certainly seen that. One of the things about the model at Asembia that I really appreciate is that we're completely agnostic in the industry. So our mission is just connecting everybody and easing the process through technology, through transparency. So that, just putting it out there, I don't think that all hubs are the same, but they are necessary. And I didn't understand this as a retail pharmacist, why is there a specialty pharmacy? And then I got into specialty pharmacy and I said, well, why is there a hub? It wasn't until I understood the importance. It's really, where does the prescription go? You need one source and you need somebody to figure out where does that prescription need to go so that patient can start therapy as fast as possible at the cheapest rate, has the same level of standard care across the board. And that's what Asembia offers, just making sure that as soon as a prescription is written, the patient is informed, the prescriber is informed, and everything flows as seamlessly as possible. And we worry about all the challenges and the roadblocks.
Right. Pooja, Shivani's kind of touching on interoperability.
Yeah.
And I think what we all, know what we mean when we talk about interoperability. But can you explain pharmacy interoperability, which may be kind of a newer term, particularly since you sit on the high-tech subcommittee on pharmacy interoperability, and maybe you can give us a little more on how we can improve interoperability in the pharmacy and other care settings.
Yeah, I think, going back to something Shivani said earlier about, that when you need information about the patient, right, you don't want to have to sort through like all this information. Another call I was on this morning, I heard someone say they had, as a pharmacist, they pulled down 500 pages of a patient record just trying to get to what their medication list.
And they were probably PDFs too.
Right, it totally was. And I just like, we have to do better. But that's really, so pharmacy interoperability is just about sharing the clinical data between a pharmacist and a provider or the care team or even a health plan. So it's really, the ability to share the clinical data for what's needed, right? A lab result, a diagnosis code. We're starting to see this expansion of the pharmacist to be able to do more clinical services. So, we're talking about specialty meds. A lot of those specialty pharmacies, like I said, it's for them to dispense it. They need some of that clinical information in order to even dispense that medication. But even at the retail pharmacies, right, they're working with the patients. They're helping them to manage their meds. They're, maybe doing A1Cs, things like that. And so being able to capture that information, that data, in a codified manner, and then share it with the provider or, another stakeholder or a health plan is really what we're talking about when we talk about pharmacy interoperability. And we could have a whole podcast focused on all the efforts around this, but there's definitely, a lot of effort around it. We're starting under Sequoia Project, they're starting a new work group, to talk about how do we get pharmacists onboarded to TEFCA and, the QHINs and things like that. And Shivani, I know we chatted a little bit about that. And, I think there's definitely some barriers and some challenges there, but I don't think it's nothing we can overcome. So I'm really hopeful about all this pharmacy interoperability discussions we're having in the industry.
Shivani, what's your perspective on pharmacy interoperability and what's Asembia doing in this area?
Oh, it's so necessary. It's so necessary. I mean, we're trying to be as transparent as possible, right? So, we're not fulfilling any of the prescriptions. We're connecting all the stakeholders, and it's important that the pharmacy that is able to fill the patient's prescription understands, the patient's benefits, their side effects, their medication history, and has all those barriers removed so that they could do what they need to do best. We do create guidance for the industry on how to clinically manage a patient that's on a specialty med. And Pooja said it beautifully. No one can define specialty anymore. It's loosely defined. Everyone has their own definition, but we do maintain clinical protocols for over 1,000 medications across all of the specialty disease states. So we do a lot to support the industry. But back to your point about pharmacy interoperability, I mean, I do think that anyone who's directly involved in the patient's care does need to be transparent and share the information, understanding that there are some limitations of consent and making sure that you're being responsible with the use of the patient's information. We see that in AI as well. I think, Tony, you asked about AI, and sure if we touched on it, but I think AI is going to change a lot of industries, not just healthcare. But we're still defining how to use it. Responsible use of AI is going to be critical. Understanding what the sources of the AI is as well before you use it, that's going to be important and significant. So I do think that that's become a focus for a lot of companies.
Pooja, you're doing some work in the AI space as well. Maybe you can talk a little bit about AI in pharmacy.
Yeah, so the CHI, the Coalition for Health AI, is doing exactly that, right? Like trying to figure out those guardrails of responsible AI use, figuring out these assurance labs to make sure that models that are being put out are, they're actually really saying what they're actually doing, checklists for people who are creating these models, to Shivani's point around, what's the data that fed into the models, right? Like, where did they get that information? Things around bias, all of that. It's such important work, and kind of everyone's talking about it. I guess, the work that I've realized in doing some of this work is we're all kind of in that, you think, of course, everything's moving, it just, super fast speeds, but I think we're all kind of figuring this out together. And there's definitely, all the organizations are kind of starting to talk about it. I think from the pharmacy perspective, one thing we did, NCPDP is pulling together just a special committee to focus on AI and pharmacy specifically and the members and what we need to do. But the nice thing is there's groups like CHI and others that are saying, let's all get together and figure it out together. And so I know, they've got also a patient-facing work group, right, of, hey, if these models are being used that are patient-facing, what does that look like? What are the checklists we have to use? what is it the patients need to understand as well. So definitely a lot of, work being done, and it's nice to see everyone coming together to kind of figure this out, together, I think which is so important.
Shivani, from your perspective, what's the low-hanging fruit as it pertains to AI? What are some things that we can do today versus some things that we need to plan for and sort of evolve to?
Well, I think being able to communicate with the patient and make it easier for them to understand their benefits using AI is going to be huge and pivotal. I think as an industry, we need to figure out what our standards are and what responsible use is like. But I think that's going to be a big low-hanging fruit, right? Is just making sure that the patient understands their coverage and the best option, and making that visible. Because again, all of that downstream work that's being done just starts all over again if we didn't put the patient on the right track to begin with.
Absolutely. Pooja, you mentioned TEFCA before. So let's talk a little bit more about TEFCA. Shivani, I think you've looked into TEFCA and potentially connecting with the QHIN. Can you give us a little bit more of your perspective and experience with TEFCA and QHINs?
Sure. I mean, what I could tell you is I need to learn more. This is a lot of my calls and conversations with Pooja is she's a wealth of information and she's always directing us in the right way. But I mean, we would love to utilize all of these, I think really industry leading initiatives and implement them and create solutions for the industry, not just for ourselves, but for everybody involved, so that we can use it and get closely connected and develop these standards, and make sure the standards include all of the things that we need that are current roadblocks, right? So to have a voice and a seat at the table would be great.
Pooja, one of the things that's important for pharmacy that's considered in TEFCA is consent. And I know you've done a fair amount of work in the consent realm. Can you talk about consent and how it works in pharmacy interoperability and with TEFCA?
Yeah. So, we touched a little bit on consent already, but just to add kind of that TEFCA piece to it, there is, the TEFCA is the Trusted Exchange and Common Agreement Framework. So, it's really kind of setting the rules of the road for data exchange. And part of that is identifying the patient. So we touched on UPI, right? Like, you're going to have all these entities that are exchanging information, pulling information down, but then also sharing information back. How do you know you're attributing that data to the right patient? So, that patient, the UPI or some kind of like patient identification is so important, but also the consent of the patient, right? So if I'm a patient and, yes, I want to share some of my patient record with providers that, to your point, Shivani, I don't want to have to, every single doctor I go to, give my history and all of that, right? So I've now consented to be able to have those providers pull my information, but there's a piece of my record I don't want them to see, right? Whether it's behavioral health related, whether it's, related to maternal health, being able to consent, right? What I'm sharing and what I'm not sharing. And having someone be able to take that consent across, and me as a patient being able to say, hey, I gave this person permission in the past to see my record. I don't want that anymore. That's all part of consent. And so, TEFCA is it's changing all the time. I think they just released the 2.0 framework, which is going to include not only, the QHIN stuff, but also doing FHIR as well, and incorporating a lot of this kind of consent and security and things like that. So a lot happening there. And I think to your question, Tony, is we got to figure out how to get pharmacies, as part of TEFCA, as part of the QHINs, as part of this, nationwide data exchange, in order to make it easier for, the pharmacists and the specialty pharmacies to dispense these medications, right, and get the information they need in order to quickly get them dispensed. So lots of applications, I think, for pharmacies, but, I think step one is just getting folks educated and involved in the space.
Shivani, how's Asembia handling consent?
I'm glad you asked, Tony. I was just going to say, I want to add to what Pooja said in terms of consent. I mean, what I'd love to see is a more maybe global consent, but as Pooja said, there's certain pieces of information that a patient may not want to share. And so we need to start building this portfolio better of how we segment our data and how we share it and what's relevant, so on the consent side, what information gets passed on to each stakeholder in healthcare? And just to make it easy, what information would you like your insurance to see? What information would you like any pharmacies that are, processing your prescription to see? Even a hub, what information are you comfortable with? And allowing the patient to make that decision just one time and then passing that on, because everybody's trying to get consent, right? And there's different consents that will apply. Consent to enroll in a program for enhanced services, that a lot of specialty pharmacies do. And that's one of the differentiators for a lot of specialty pharmacies is they'll go above and beyond for certain therapies and disease states and make sure that the patient is well educated. And one of their biggest barriers is that consent piece. So for us on a technology side, our goal is always communicating with each stakeholder in the format that they desire. Do you prefer phone calls? Do you prefer, text messages? Would you use a portal? How would you use it? How often would you use it? And so we don't limit ourselves to any one method. We try to use anything that is available, and again, sharing that information back as best as we can with all of the connected parties.
Generally, Shivani, what do you see as the biggest barriers to us automating in a standardized way specialty?
We have to create that standard. State standard, there's differentiation by state, by payer, by plan. Even the definition of specialty isn't a standard. So I think, but we're not going to solve all that. But I do think that a lot of the solutions that we have today, I think can be just resolved by sharing and passing along the steps and the work that one entity has already done to help that patient out and passing it to the next entity involved. So if we can do that, and then if we can also, as we're documenting data, say what's meaningful and for how long and categorize it, that's going to go a long way. So I think I've spoken to Pooja about it before. We try to extract information out of an EMR, and it's too much sometimes, or it's not enough. I don't really need a vaccine history when I'm trying to find out what your A1C was, so
right.
But if the data is categorized in a standard, I think it becomes more meaningful and usable. Instead of looking through documentations, let's use discrete data points that are easily usable.
Yeah.
Pooja, do you have anything to add to what do you consider the sort of 2 to 3 biggest barriers that we're challenged with?
Yeah, I think I agree with Shivani on it's really that getting the right data, the only, they don't need like that 500-page, patient record, right? Like give the ability to actually just grab that last A1C that you need, things like that. And I want to go back to, I think Shivani has, weaved this in the conversation, transparency. I think transparency around all this stuff, right? Like even today, and Shivani, you mentioned this earlier, right? The way it's working today is a prescriber has stored in the EHR, my favorite pharmacy, right? So that all the medications, all the electronic prescriptions are going to go to that one pharmacy, and without them necessarily knowing, hey, this is a specialty med that can only be filled at this one, or I have to do this patient enrollment first. And so I think that transparency of that information and then providing that to, upstream in the EHR could be such a huge, barrier that could be knocked down pretty quickly. So I think it's that whole transparency of that information that, really the prescriber needs to see upstream as opposed to, 10 steps down the road. So I think
okay, that's really great insight. As we close out, one of the things that we'd like to do is ask our guests if they have any final messages or calls to action that they'd like to send out to the industry. Shivani, you're our guest, so I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, Tony. What I'd like to say is, come to Access 25. It is our specialty conference that we host, but it is for the whole industry. There's so much to learn there, so much to experience. And, we're very proud to say that it's been well adopted over the years, continues to grow. A lot of the industry stakeholders, leaders are there. So in 2025, it'll be from April 27th to May 1st. We are open for speakers. We are looking for opportunities. That deadline closes on September 30th. So anybody interested, it is a great forum. I'm always learning and being educated there. So I think it's a great place to be.
And where is it?
It's at the Wynn Las Vegas.
Cool. That's a very fun place.
It is a fun place.
Pooja, how about you? Do you have any sort of final messages or calls to action that you'd like to send out to the industry?
Yeah, I think, what I've seen, and part of this has been attending the Asembia conferences. I think, it used to be a lot smaller, first of all, and it wasn't, there wasn't a lot of talk about this kind of electronic data sharing. And, this past one that I went to, I was so excited to hear people talking about electronic prior authorization, right? And what do we need to do? And now it's working, and what additional information? So I think that's, just seeing the focus on this. But I would say, let's figure out, and like I said, there's a lot of initiatives around this of, how do we get more information upstream? So, the vendors and the pharmacies and the people downstream are not having to make phone calls, fax, chase the patient to get this information. I mean, we've got to do a better job as an industry to say, we're going to be more transparent about this, first of all, but then also share the information electronically. So, we're able to get that patient on to the drug faster. Because, I think we heard this throughout this discussion is, these medications, these people are getting them for a reason, right? They need to get on these specialty drugs. And so the faster we can get patients on them, the faster they're going to get better and, avoid hospitalizations and all the horrible downstream things. So, I think it's something that we're starting to definitely make progress on. But, I would say let's continue the discussion and figure it out.
Because at the end of the day, one of the things that I like to always say is we're all patients.
Yeah.
And if there's a specialty therapy that's prescribed for us, to your point, Pooja, it's something that we need. And the sooner we get it, the sooner we're feeling better, the better it is for everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, with that, I think we're ready to wrap up. So in closing, I'd like to thank my POCP co-host and pharmacy expert, Pooja Babbrah, and to thank our special guest, Shivani Patel with Asembia. A friendly reminder to new listeners that you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever your platform that you pick to listen to your podcast, including Healthcare Now Radio. We also post videos of our podcast episodes and sometimes longer versions on the POCP YouTube channel. And don't forget, Health IT is a dish best served hot.
Before you go, let's hear from a few industry stakeholders as they share why they attend the Asembia Summit each year.
My name is Ankit Jain. I'm one of the founders and lead the company at Infinitus Systems. We are a healthcare automation company that focuses on automating back office phone calls around prior authorizations, benefit verifications, and prescription transfers. We work with large specialty pharmacies, infusion centers, surgery centers, patient access groups across the ecosystem. Well, a lot of folks that are in and around the specialty world come to Asembia. And so it's a great place to meet partners, great place to meet customers, and great place to meet those that are looking to transform their businesses using technology.
Cecilia Byers, clinical product advisor at SureScripts. I'm a pharmacist is my background in training. So this is my 8th year at Asembia. I started coming to Asembia as a pharmacist when I was working in specialty pharmacy. So a lot has changed in that time. I think today when I come, I really look at the trends, what's going on out there, what are the hot topics. AI is one of the big ones I've been hearing this time, machine learning. Value-based care is another one that we're hearing a lot about and trying to find ways that, pharmacies can bring more value into the ecosystem of healthcare.
My name is Drew Hunsinger. I'm the Vice President of Corporate Development at Dr. First. So we come to Asembia, one, because it's a good place to keep a pulse on everything that's going on. A lot of our customers on the life sciences and pharmaceutical side are here, as well as increasing partners with hubs, with other technology vendors. It's kind of a good intersection of all the areas that we touch.
Is it a challenge to stay on top of interoperability regulations and the flurry of activity with FHIR accelerators? Email us at interoperoutlook@pocp.com to learn more about our new Interoperability Outlook subscription monitoring service.